What if the key to commanding your future wasn't found in the latest self-help trend or corporate strategy, but in an ancient philosophy that's been quietly shaping the greatest minds for thousands of years? Stoicism, often misunderstood as just enduring hardship or suppressing emotions, is actually one of the most dynamic, action-oriented tools a leader can wield. Think about Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled an empire in chaos, yet wrote in his private journal, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this, and you will find strength. That's not resignation. That's the ultimate playbook for turning obstacles into advantage. And here's the surprising truth. Stoicism wasn't designed for passive observers. It was forged by doers, by visionaries who shaped history because they mastered their inner world first. Now, imagine applying that same relentless clarity to your ambitions today. The world feels more unpredictable than ever. Markets shift overnight, industries transform, and the pressure to adapt never lets up. But what if the chaos isn't the problem? What if the real hurdle is the mindset we bring to it? This is where Stoicism becomes your secret weapon. It's not about ignoring emotions or grinding through life with a stiff upper lip. It's about cultivating a mindset that sees opportunity where others see setbacks, that thrives on challenge because it's trained to focus only on what's within its control. The visionary leaders of our time, from entrepreneurs to innovators, aren't just smart or lucky. They're disciplined in their thinking, deliberate in their actions, and unshakable in their purpose. And that's no accident. So today, we're dismantling the myth that Stoicism is just for philosophers or historians. This is about unlocking a way of thinking that turns adversity into fuel, pressure into precision, and ambition into something far more powerful: unbreakable intent. We'll explore how to blend timeless principles with modern ambition, how to lead with clarity when everything feels uncertain, and most importantly, how to build a mindset that doesn't just chase success but defines it on its own terms. Because the future doesn't belong to those who wait for calm seas. It's commanded by those who learn to sail in any storm. Ready? Let's begin. Stoicism isn't about rejecting ambition, it's about refining it. Think of the most driven leaders you admire. What sets them apart isn't just their hunger for success, but their ability to pursue it with a kind of calm intensity, as if they're playing chess while everyone else is reacting to checkers. This is the Stoic leader's paradox: fierce ambition paired with emotional detachment. It sounds contradictory, but that's where the magic happens. Epictetus put it perfectly: some things are within our control, and some things are not. The visionary doesn't waste energy agonizing over external outcomes. They pour every ounce of focus into their actions, their decisions, their discipline. The result, a clarity that cuts through noise like a laser. Take a CEO steering a company through a market crash. While competitors panic, the Stoic leader sees chaos as data. They don't ignore the turmoil, they just refuse to let it hijack their judgment. Instead of fixating on stock prices they can't control, they focus on what they can, innovating faster, rallying their team, or spotting hidden opportunities in the wreckage. This isn't indifference, it's strategic detachment, and it's what separates leaders who burn out from those who build legacies. Here's the subtle shift that changes everything. Stoicism teaches us to love the process, not the trophy. When you're overly attached to a specific outcome, whether it's landing that deal, hitting a revenue target, or gaining recognition, you hand over your power to chance. But when you fall in love with the daily practice of excellence, with the grit and growth required to chase something meaningful, you become unstoppable. Because now, even if the outcome shifts, you haven't lost. You've already won by showing up as your best self. So ask yourself this: what's one goal you're clinging to too tightly? Maybe it's a promotion, a launch, or a personal milestone. Now imagine approaching it with the same drive, but with open hands instead of a white-knuckle grip. That's where real freedom begins, because ambition without detachment is like running a marathon while carrying a boulder. But when you learn to run light, you'll not only go farther, you'll enjoy the race. Fear paralyzes, rehearsal liberates. This is the essence of Premeditatio Malorum, the Stoic practice of deliberately envisioning worst-case scenarios to disarm their emotional grip. For visionary leaders, this isn't about pessimism, it's about preparation. Seneca put it bluntly: what is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster. By confronting our fears head-on, we transform them from specters in the dark into manageable variables on a spreadsheet. Take Elon Musk in SpaceX's early days. 3 consecutive rocket explosions could have been catastrophic financially, professionally, emotionally. But Musk had already lived those failures in his mind long before they happened. He'd rehearsed the setbacks, analyzed the contingencies, and internalized a truth every Stoic understands: the obstacle is the way. When the rockets failed, he didn't crumble, he iterated. That's Premeditatio Malorum in action, not as a mental exercise but as a strategic advantage. Here's how this works for modern leaders. When you vividly imagine losing your biggest client, your funding falling through, or your project collapsing, you accomplish 2 things. First, you expose the fear as survivable. The brain's amygdala reacts less violently to threats it's already mapped. Second, you uncover hidden solutions. Visualizing failure forces you to ask, then what? Revealing backup plans you'd otherwise overlook. So let's make this practical. Grab a pen and answer this: what's the professional nightmare that keeps you up at night? Now write down 3 specific steps you'd take if it happened. Not vague platitudes, concrete actions. That's the difference between anxiety and agency. Because when you preempt fear with a plan, you're no longer a victim of circumstance. You're a strategist turning landmines into stepping stones. This is where Stoicism transcends philosophy and becomes a leadership superpower. The unprepared mind sees risk as a threat. The Stoic mind sees it as intelligence gathering. By routinely stress testing your ambitions against adversity, you don't just build resilience, you cultivate a rare kind of courage. Not the absence of fear, but the mastery of it. And in a world where uncertainty is the only constant, that mastery becomes your competitive edge. Productivity isn't about doing more, it's about focusing better. And that's where the Stoic dichotomy of control becomes your secret weapon as a leader. Picture this: 2 circles. One contains everything within your power, your effort, your attitude, your choices. The other holds everything else: market shifts, competitors' moves, even the opinions of others. The visionary leader knows these circles aren't just philosophical concepts, they're the ultimate filter for every decision. Marcus Aurelius called it the inner citadel, that unshakable core where real power lives. Because here's the truth: leadership isn't tested when things go smoothly. It's forged in chaos, when the easy thing is to react and the transformative thing is to focus. Consider a CEO navigating a PR storm. While the media spins narratives and critics amplify noise, the Stoic leader doesn't waste energy demanding retractions or obsessing over public perception. Instead, they ask one question: what can I control? Maybe it's assembling a transparent response, reinforcing team morale, or doubling down on customer value. Everything else, the headlines, the gossip, the outrage cycle, falls outside the circle. This isn't avoidance, it's strategic selectivity. Reactive leaders burn out trying to manage the uncontrollable. Proactive leaders thrive by channeling all their resources into what they can actually move. The magic lies in training your mind to spot the difference. Think of a ship's captain in a storm. They can't command the wind or waves, but they can adjust the sails, steady the rudder, and keep the crew aligned. That's the dichotomy of control in action. Every distraction you ignore, every ounce of energy you redirect from frustration to action, compounds into a staggering competitive advantage. So let's make this personal. What uncontrollable factor drains your focus? Is it a volatile market, a competitor's strategy, the fear of falling short? Now imagine taking all that mental bandwidth and investing it instead into your craft, your team, your next bold move. That's the shift from scattered to strategic, from anxious to unstoppable. Because when you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you free up reserves of energy you never knew you had. And that's how ordinary leaders become extraordinary. Stoics don't overcome challenges, they consume them. This is the essence of Amor Fati, the radical practice of not just accepting fate but loving it, obstacles and all. Nietzsche famously said, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," but the Stoics took it further. For them, adversity wasn't just a test of strength, it was the raw material for transformation. Epictetus put it bluntly, the obstacle is the way. In other words, the very thing blocking your path becomes the path when you learn to flip it upside down. Consider Steve Jobs' exile from Apple in 1985. To most, it looked like a career-ending failure, but Jobs didn't just endure it, he used it. Those years in the wilderness birthed NXT and Pixar, ventures that honed his vision and leadership in ways Apple never could have. By the time he returned, he wasn't just a founder, he was a philosopher king, armed with the resilience and creativity to reinvent an entire industry. That's Amor Fati in action, a setback metabolized into fuel. Here's why this mindset is a game changer for modern leaders. Resistance isn't just inevitable, it's necessary. Think of a muscle, it grows only when stressed. The same applies to vision. Every rejection, every failed launch, every moment of doubt is an invitation to refine your strategy, deepen your resolve, or discover a pivot you'd never have seen otherwise. The obstacle isn't the enemy of progress, it's the catalyst. So let's make this personal. What recent failure or frustration have you been resisting? Maybe it's a project that stalled, a goal that slipped away, or criticism that stung. Now, imagine embracing it not as a loss but as a lesson. Ask yourself, how could this very setback be preparing me for something greater? Because the difference between ordinary and extraordinary leadership isn't avoiding storms, it's learning to dance in the rain. And that dance begins when you stop fighting reality and start falling in love with its gifts, even when they come disguised as grenades. This is where Stoicism shifts from theory to lived power. When you stop seeing obstacles as interruptions and start recognizing them as invitations, something profound happens. You stop fearing adversity and start leveraging it. That's the secret of history's most resilient leaders. They didn't just survive their struggles, they let those struggles sculpt them into forces of nature. And you can too, one reframed challenge at a time. Rome wasn't built in a day, but it was built daily. That's the Stoic secret modern leaders often miss. Patience isn't passive waiting, it's active persistence. In a world obsessed with viral moments and overnight success, Stoicism whispers a radical truth. Lasting power compounds quietly. Seneca put it best in his first letter. Life is long if you know how to use it. He wasn't talking about lifespan, he meant depth. The visionary leader understands that real influence isn't manufactured in a sprint. It's cultivated like an oak, ring by ring. Take Warren Buffett, the billionaire who credits his success not to flashy trades, but to what he calls the snowball effect. While others chased hot stocks, Buffett spent decades letting wisdom and value accumulate, buying, holding, and reinvesting with glacial discipline. The result, a fortune built not on luck, but on the unstoppable mathematics of consistency. That stoic patience in action, the willingness to let time work for you, not against you. Here's the hard pivot most miss. Compounding wisdom beats short-term wins because it's antifragile. A viral post fades, a trending product gets replaced. But deep expertise, relationships forged in trust, and systems refined over years, they don't just endure, they thrive under pressure. The Stoic leader knows this. They're the antithesis of the hustle culture grind because they measure progress not in clicks or quarters, but in legacy. So let's cut through the noise. Where are you sacrificing depth for speed? Maybe it's skipping mentorship to chase a promotion or favoring quick fixes over foundational skills. Now imagine redirecting that energy toward what Seneca called the art of long-term living. What if, instead of racing to the next milestone, you invested in the kind of growth that multiplies, knowledge that deepens, networks that strengthen, and character that anchors? This is where Stoicism collides with modern ambition. The impatient see time as an enemy, the Stoic sees it as an ally. Every day you spend honing your craft, every setback you metabolize into wisdom, every small step taken with integrity, they're not just passing moments. They're bricks in the empire you're building, and empires aren't erected in a frenzy. They're laid stone by leaders who understand the long game isn't just a strategy. It's the only game worth playing. The loudest in the room are often the least secure because true confidence doesn't need a spotlight. Stoicism draws a razor-sharp line between ego and equanimity, between the fragile bravado that crumbles under pressure and the quiet assurance that holds steady in any storm. Marcus Aurelius captured it perfectly. You could be good today, but instead you choose tomorrow. That's the heart of Stoic confidence. It's not about proving yourself to others. It's about mastering yourself for the work that matters. Consider a high-stakes negotiator facing down a hostile boardroom. The arrogant executive might dominate the conversation, talking over objections to mask their insecurity. But the Stoic, they listen intently, respond precisely, and let silence do the heavy lifting. Their power doesn't come from volume, it comes from the unshakable knowledge that they've prepared for this moment. Every counterargument rehearsed, every contingency mapped. That's the difference between posturing and poise. When you've done the inner work, external validation becomes irrelevant. This is where Stoicism dismantles imposter syndrome. That nagging voice whispering, "You don't belong here," thrives on one toxic fuel, comparison. But the Stoic leader knows confidence isn't borrowed from others' opinions, it's built through deliberate practice. Think of an athlete who's logged 10,000 hours of training. When they step onto the field, doubt doesn't stand a chance. Not because they're immune to fear, but because they've earned the right to trust themselves. So let's expose the ego's sneakiest trick. It convinces us that self-worth is a trophy to win, rather than a skill to cultivate. Ask yourself, when does your ego hijack your judgment? Maybe it's dismissing feedback to protect your pride, or overpromising to appear capable. Now imagine replacing that reflex with something far more powerful. The humility to say, "I don't know yet," followed by the discipline to learn. That's the Stoic pivot from seeking approval to becoming undeniable. Because here's the paradox, the less you need to look confident, the more confidence you'll radiate. It's the law of inverted effort. The archer who obsesses over the crowd's cheers misses the target. The one who focuses solely on their form, they don't just hit the bullseye, they redefine what's possible. That's the gift of Stoic confidence, not a shield to hide behind, but a compass that guides you inward, then onward. And in a world drowning in noise, that compass becomes your superpower. Two leaders face the same storm. Why does one sink while the other sails? The answer lies not in the storm itself, but in the lens through which they view it. Epictetus nailed it centuries ago. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views which they take of them. That's the essence of Stoic perception, the realization that reality is neutral, but interpretation is everything. A crisis isn't inherently good or bad. It's a blank canvas waiting for the brushstrokes of your judgment. Take Airbnb in 2020. When COVID lockdowns evaporated global travel, they didn't just see collapse, they saw reinvention. While competitors froze, they pivoted to virtual experiences and localized stays, tapping into a pent-up demand for connection. The crisis didn't change, their perception of it did. That's the Stoic edge, the ability to zoom out and ask, what else could this mean? Here's the mental shift that changes everything. Stressful events don't happen to you, they happen for you. A missed promotion isn't just rejection, it's redirection. A market crash isn't just loss, it's a fire sale on opportunity. The Stoic leader trains their mind to spot these hidden pivots, not through toxic positivity, but through ruthless objectivity. They know that every situation holds multiple narratives, and the one they choose becomes their reality. So let's put this into practice. What stressful situation are you currently wrestling with? Maybe it's a project setback, a strained relationship, or an unpredictable market. Now, strip away the emotional charge and ask, what's the raw data here? Then brainstorm 3 alternative interpretations, one pragmatic, one optimistic, and one absurdly creative. You'll quickly see the event hasn't changed, but your power over it has. This is where Stoicism transcends philosophy and becomes a competitive advantage. When you master perception, you stop being a passive reactor to circumstances and start becoming an active architect of meaning. And in a world where chaos is guaranteed, that skill isn't just useful, it's survival, because the storm doesn't discriminate, but the way you see it. That determines whether you drown or learn to walk on water. Every decision is a time capsule. How will it age? That's the question Stoic leaders ask long before the moment of choice arrives. While most people weigh decisions by their immediate consequences, the visionary operates on a different scale, the 10-10-10 rule. What will this choice cost me in 10 months? How will it shape my life in 10 years? And what legacy will it leave in 10 decades? This isn't just strategic planning, it's Seneca's view from above, applied with modern precision. Imagine standing on a mountaintop, looking down at your life not as a series of urgent moments, but as a single unfolding story. What seems critical today shrinks to insignificance, while the quiet, consistent choices, the ones aligned with purpose, rise to the surface. Jeff Bezos famously called this the regret minimization framework. When debating whether to leave his Wall Street job to start Amazon, he projected himself to age 80 and asked, "Will I regret not trying this?" The answer was so obvious, the decision made itself. That's the power of telescopic thinking. The Stoics didn't have spreadsheets or quarterly reports, but they understood something even more vital. The present is just the past's future. Every choice you make today is already history in waiting. Here's where most leaders stumble. They confuse speed with decisiveness, mistaking quick reactions for strategic clarity. But the 10-10-10 rule forces a pause, a deliberate zooming out. Take a CEO considering a merger. The immediate perks, market share, stock bumps, might dazzle. But what about cultural erosion in 10 months, talent drain in 10 years, reputational stains that outlast a lifetime? The Stoic doesn't avoid risk, they measure it across timelines, not headlines. So let's make this visceral. Grab a sheet of paper and draw 3 columns: 10 months, 10 years, 10 decades. Now pick one decision gnawing at you: a career leap, a relationship crossroads, a financial gamble. Fill in each column ruthlessly. The exercise isn't about predicting the future, it's about exposing the weight of your choices. Because when you see today's dilemma through tomorrow's eyes, the right move often reveals itself, not as the easiest path, but as the one you'll least regret. This is Stoicism stripped of abstraction, a tool for cutting through the fog of now. The next time you're torn between short-term gain and lasting impact, remember the ancient philosophers and modern titans share one habit. They don't just decide, they time travel, and in that shift lies the difference between a life of reactions and one of intentional legacy. The more authority you gain, the fewer words you need. That's the paradox of influence. The louder the world gets, the more power lies in strategic silence. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, put it bluntly: we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. This wasn't just etiquette advice, it was a masterclass in leadership, because when every word carries weight, the wisest choice is often to let the silence do the talking. Consider Angela Merkel, the physicist-turned-chancellor who steered Germany through crisis after crisis with a trademark restraint. While others scrambled for sound bites, she mastered the art of the pause, weighing each syllable, refusing to be rushed into hollow statements. Her colleagues called it Merkel's silence, a weapon sharper than any rhetoric. In an age of knee-jerk reactions, her deliberate speech wasn't indecision, it was precision. The Stoics would have recognized it instantly: a leader secure enough to let the moment breathe before acting. Here's why this matters now more than ever. In a world drowning in hot takes and performative urgency, restraint becomes revolutionary. Every unnecessary word drains focus. Every reactive comment risks misalignment. But when you speak sparingly, only when it serves a purpose, your words gain gravity. Think of a courtroom judge. Their power doesn't come from constant commentary, but from the weight of their final ruling. That's the Stoic communicator's edge, the ability to distill chaos into clarity with surgical brevity. So let's expose the myth that leadership requires constant visibility. The truth: influence compounds in quiet. Every meeting you listen more than dominate, every email you shorten by half, every social media post you don't publish, they're not missed opportunities. They're investments in a reputation for substance over noise. Now turn the lens inward. Where does your communication default to autopilot? Maybe it's interrupting to prove your point, or filling awkward pauses with half-formed thoughts. What if, just for one day, you measured your words like currency, spending only what's necessary? You'd quickly discover, the less you say, the more people lean in. Because silence isn't empty space, it's the canvas where mastery paints its masterpiece. You can't lead others if you're leaking energy. That's the brutal arithmetic of leadership. Your influence is only as strong as your focus. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly when he wrote, "Ask yourself at every moment, is this necessary?" It's not just a question, it's a scalpel for cutting away the trivial. Because here's the paradox: the more responsibility you take on, the less you can afford to spend your mental currency on distractions masquerading as priorities. This is where the Pareto principle collides with Stoic wisdom. You've likely heard of the 80-20 rule. 80% of results come from 20% of effort. But when applied to mental energy, it becomes something far more profound. 80% of your clarity, creativity, and command comes from ruthlessly guarding the 20% of focus that fuels it. Think of Bill Gates' legendary Think Weeks, where he'd vanish into a secluded cabin with stacks of books and research papers. No meetings, no emails, no noise, just deep, uninterrupted reflection. Those weeks didn't just recharge him, they birthed Microsoft's most transformative strategies. Gates wasn't just working, he was practicing attention alchemy, turning protected focus into visionary breakthroughs. The modern world hijacks this truth with endless urgency. Notifications, back-to-back meetings, the myth of multitasking. They're not just distractions, they're energy leaks. And here's what no one tells you. Every time you switch tasks, you're not just losing minutes, you're burning attention capital, the finite mental fuel required for high-impact work. The Stoic leader knows this. They don't just manage time, they curate attention, treating it like the scarce resource it is. So let's make this visceral. Grab a notebook and draw 2 columns. Label 1, energy generators, the tasks that leave you clearer, sharper, more inspired. Label the other, energy drains, the obligations that exhaust you with little return. Now, the brutal question. What 20% of activities consume 80% of your focus while delivering marginal value? Maybe it's that weekly report no one reads, or the meetings that could be emails. The goal isn't to eliminate them all, it's to contain them like hazardous material in a sealed lab, because mastery isn't about doing more with less. It's about doing less with more presence, more depth, more intentionality. When you stop scattering your energy and start concentrating it like sunlight through a magnifying glass, something extraordinary happens. The ordinary combusts and the extraordinary ignites. That's the Stoic edge, not just productivity but potency. And in a world drowning in distraction, that's the rarest currency of all. What if you woke up tomorrow with only what you thanked fate for today? That's the razor's edge of negative visualization, the Stoic practice of mentally stripping away comforts to reveal their true worth. Seneca put it perfectly, enjoy what you have as if you'll lose it. This isn't pessimism, it's perspective alchemy. By temporarily losing something in your mind, your health, your relationships, your success, you gain something far more powerful, the ability to see them clearly for the first time. Take a founder who narrowly avoids a car accident on the way to a pitch meeting. The near miss doesn't just shake them, it sharpens them. Suddenly, the investor's skepticism fades next to the staggering gift of being alive to pitch at all. That's Premeditatio Malorum in action, a mental rehearsal of loss that doesn't paralyze but prioritizes. The trivial stresses, the delayed flight, the tough negotiations stop feeling like threats and start looking like what they truly are, proof you're still in the game. Here's the neuroscience behind the magic. The brain's reticular activating system filters reality based on what we value most. When you consciously imagine losing something, your career, your mobility, your loved ones, you trigger a primal recalibration. The morning coffee isn't just caffeine, it's a ritual of warmth. The colleague who annoys you, a collaborator you'd miss deeply if they were gone. Negative visualization isn't about dwelling on darkness, it's about switching on the lights so you can see the room you've been taking for granted. So let's make this visceral. Close your eyes and picture one thing you rely on daily, your eyesight, your team, your financial stability. Now imagine it vanished overnight. Feel that gut punch. That's not fear, it's data. It's your subconscious screaming, this matters. The Stoic leader doesn't wait for fate to deliver that lesson. They self-administer it regularly, like a vaccine against complacency. Now the pivot. What privilege do you treat as background noise? Maybe it's the ability to walk without pain, the mentor who answers your calls, or the simple freedom to choose your work. Today, try this. Thank them like it's your last chance, not as a vague gratitude exercise, but as a strategic reset. Because when you stop seeing blessings as entitlements and start recognizing them as loans, something shifts. You lead lighter, you decide bolder, you fight cleaner. This is where Stoicism transcends philosophy and becomes a competitive edge. The leader who practices negative visualization, isn't just prepared for loss, they're immunized against taking their fortune for granted. And in a world where so many chase more, they've unlocked the real secret, the power to fully possess what they already have. The first and last hour dictate the quality of the day, not because they're magically powerful, but because they're the bookends that hold everything else together. Stoicism isn't just about grand principles, it's about the micro-rituals that embed those principles into your nervous system. Epictetus put it bluntly: first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. That gap between intention and action, it's bridged by daily practice. Think of it like this: a sculptor doesn't create a masterpiece with a single strike of the chisel. It's the 100 tiny, deliberate taps that shape the stone. Take Tim Ferriss' morning journaling habit. It's not just writing, it's a mental filtration system. By asking himself, what would this day look like if it were great? And what am I afraid of? Before the world's noise intrudes, he's not just planning his day. He's programming his focus. That's the Stoic twist. Morning routines aren't about productivity hacks. They're about sovereignty. You're not checking emails or reacting to overnight chaos. You're deciding in advance what deserves your attention. Now flip to the evening. While most people numb themselves with screens or distractions, the Stoic leader conducts a postmortem of the mind. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his Meditations, less a diary than a dialogue with his better self. What did I do wrong today? What did I do right? What could I improve? Not as self-criticism, but as course correction. This isn't journaling for the sake of journaling. It's deliberate calibration. Like a pilot reviewing flight data before the next takeoff, you're not just logging events, you're extracting patterns. Here's the psychological genius behind these anchors. They exploit state-dependent memory. The brain recalls information more easily when you're in the same state, physical, emotional, environmental, as when you learned it. By creating consistent morning and evening rituals, you're wiring resilience into your very physiology. Stress hits, your body remembers the morning clarity. Overwhelm creeps in, your nervous system recalls the evening reflection. Over time, these rituals become automatic stabilizers, like shock absorbers for your mindset. So let's make this actionable. What tiny ritual could transform your mindset? Maybe it's 5 minutes of pre-dawn silence with the question, what's worth fighting for today? Or an evening pause to acknowledge one hard truth and one small victory. The key isn't complexity, it's consistency meets intention. Because the Stoics knew something modern science now confirms. You don't rise to the level of your goals, you fall to the level of your systems. And those systems are built one deliberate morning, one reflective night at a time. This is where philosophy becomes physiology. When you ritualize reflection, you're not just thinking like a Stoic, you're living like one. And in that living, you discover the ultimate irony. The routines that feel like constraints are actually the keys to freedom. Because when your days start and end with purpose, everything in between bends toward meaning. Your network isn't your net worth, your discernment is. Seneca cut to the heart of it when he wrote, "Friendship always benefits, love sometimes injures." That's the Stoics' edge in relationships. They don't collect connections, they curate them. In a world obsessed with follower counts and superficial networking, the visionary leader understands something radical. 5 minds that sharpen yours are worth more than 5,000 that merely echo your thoughts. Consider the difference between a LinkedIn feed and a mastermind group. One is a stage for performative achievement, the other is a forge for transformation. The Stoic doesn't mistake visibility for value. They know that real growth happens in the quiet spaces between trusted peers, where vulnerability meets accountability and ego gets checked at the door. Think of Benjamin Franklin's Junto Club, where tradesmen and thinkers gathered not to swap business cards, but to dissect ideas and challenge each other's blind spots. That's the alchemy of depth over breadth, relationships that don't just expand your Rolodex but upgrade your operating system. Here's the litmus test: who in your circle elevates your thinking? Not just the people who cheer you on, but those who ask the uncomfortable questions, the ones who'll tell you when your strategy has holes or when your ambition is outpacing your ethics. These aren't just contacts, they're co-architects of your resilience. The Stoic leader actively seeks these voices out, not because they're easy to hear, but because they're necessary. So let's strip this down to practice. Audit your inner circle with ruthless honesty. How many of your current relationships are transactional, built on mutual utility rather than mutual growth? Now, imagine reinvesting that energy into a handful of connections who demand your best and reflect it back. That's the shift from networking to nurturing, from collecting to cultivating. Because when you stop measuring influence by reach and start measuring it by resonance, something profound happens. Your circle shrinks, but your impact expands. This is where Stoicism redefines social capital. The ancient philosophers didn't host mixers. They built symposia, spaces where wine and wisdom flowed in equal measure. Today's leaders need the same intentionality, not more connections but better ones, not louder voices but clearer ones, because in the end, your network won't be remembered for its size. It'll be remembered for its signal, the quality of thought it helped you transmit to the world. If it's not a hell yes, it's a no. That simple mantra hides a Stoic superpower. Most leaders never master the art of strategic refusal. Marcus Aurelius wrestled with this daily, writing in his Meditations, "If you seek tranquility, do less, not nothing, less. Eliminate the unnecessary." Notice he didn't say, "Do more efficiently." He cut to the bone, because every yes isn't just an agreement. It's a trade, a surrender of focus, energy, and time you'll never reclaim. The visionary leader knows this math cold. Productivity isn't about cramming more in. It's about ruthlessly protecting what matters. Warren Buffett's 20-slot rule dramatizes this. He tells his team to imagine they have a punch card with just 20 slots representing lifetime investments. Once punched, no more. The result, extreme selectivity. No knee-jerk bets, no distracted dabbling, just cold, calculated commitments to the rare opportunities worth burning a precious slot. That's Stoic boundary setting in action, not avoidance but concentration. Buffett didn't become a legend by saying yes often. He did it by saying no to almost everything. Here's where most leaders self-sabotage. They confuse availability with leadership, mistaking a packed calendar for importance. But the truth, every meeting accepted is deep work deferred. Every casual, sure to a side project is focus fractured. The Stoic reframes refusal not as rudeness, but as respect for your mission, your team, and your finite attention. Imagine a surgeon constantly leaving the operating room to take calls. Absurd, right? Yet leaders do the cognitive equivalent daily, multitasking their way into mediocrity. So let's make this visceral. Grab your calendar and highlight every commitment that doesn't make you lean forward with conviction. Now ask, what masterpiece could you create with that reclaimed time? Maybe it's the book outline gathering dust, the mentorship you've postponed, or the strategic pivot your gut screams is overdue. The no isn't deprivation, it's the scalpel carving space for your legacy. This is where Stoicism shifts from philosophy to leverage. When you stop seeing boundaries as barriers and start recognizing them as launchpads, you unlock a paradox. By narrowing your options, you expand your impact. Because the world's most influential leaders aren't the busiest, they're the most selective. And that selectivity starts with two letters, N-O, spoken not with guilt, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're protecting. You don't find time for what matters, you carve it. That's the brutal elegance of Stoic time blocking, treating your calendar not as a passive receptacle for demands, but as a chisel for sculpting your legacy. Seneca warned, life is long if you know how to use it, but most people die with their most important work still trapped in the someday corner of their minds. The visionary leader knows time isn't just currency, it's clay, and every unguarded moment is a missed chance to shape it. Consider Elon Musk's infamous 5-minute scheduling blocks. At first glance, it looks like hyper-obsessive productivity hacking, but peel back the layers and you'll see Stoic discipline in action. By dividing his day into tiny, intentional fragments, Musk isn't just managing time, he's commanding it. Each block is a declaration. This is what deserves me right now. No autopilot, no reactive drift, just ruthless alignment between action and purpose. That's the hidden power of time blocking. It transforms abstract priorities into lived reality. Here's where most stumble. They mistake busyness for progress, filling calendars with motion but no direction. The Stoic alternative, reverse engineering from death. Imagine your last day arrives. What unmet priorities will haunt you? The book unwritten, the mentorship never offered. The bold bet you hesitated to take. Now, flip the script. Those are the very things that belong in your sacred blocks, the non-negotiable hours guarded like a fortress. Not because they're urgent, but because they're irreplaceable. So let's make this tactical. Grab your calendar and hunt for phantom time, those default slots hijacked by others' agendas. The 30-minute quick syncs that bleed into hours, the flexible afternoons that evaporate in inbox trivia. Now reclaim one, just one, label it legacy work, and defend it like your future depends on it. Because it does. This is where Stoicism collides with modern productivity. Most systems focus on doing more. The Stoic focuses on doing less, but better. Not every email deserves a reply. Not every meeting warrants your presence. But the few things that align with your deepest purpose, they deserve undivided sovereignty. Because in the end, your calendar won't be remembered for how packed it was. It'll be remembered for what it built, and that starts with a single, defiant choice: to treat time not as something you spend, but as something you honor. Between event and action lies the space where wisdom grows. That breath, that heartbeat of hesitation, it's not indecision. It's the birthplace of mastery. Epictetus put it bluntly, don't let the force of an impression when it first hits you knock you off your feet. Just say, hold on a moment, let me see who you are and what you represent. This is the Stoic pause, the deliberate wedge between what happens to you and how you choose to meet it. And in that sliver of silence, leaders are made or unmade. Picture a CEO at the epicenter of a PR firestorm. The facts are brutal, the board is panicking. The media's narrative is spiraling. The reflexive move, issue an immediate apology, fire someone, or worse, go silent. But the Stoic leader does something radical. They wait. Not out of paralysis, but precision. They let the initial wave of emotion pass, then ask, what's true here, what's noise, and what's the most principled response, not just the fastest. That pause isn't weakness, it's the ultimate display of control. Like a martial artist redirecting an opponent's momentum, they turn chaos into clarity by refusing to meet it at its frenzied pitch. History's most decisive figures weren't the quickest reactors. They were the most disciplined responders. Take Abraham Lincoln drafting the Emancipation Proclamation. With a nation fracturing and pressure mounting from all sides, he spent months listening, refining, and yes, pausing. Critics called it hesitation, but Lincoln knew timing is strategy. By waiting until the Union had a battlefield victory to anchor the announcement, he didn't just free enslaved people. he ensured the decree would stick. That's the pause as power play. Here's the neuroscience behind why this works. When the amygdala detects threat, it floods your system with cortisol, narrowing your focus to fight, flight, or freeze. But the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment, operates slower. The Stoic pause is literally buying time for your higher brain to weigh in. It's the difference between a tweeted rant you regret and a measured statement that shifts paradigms. So let's make this personal. Think of the last time you felt hijacked by emotion, a colleague's snub, a missed deadline, a public critique. Now rewind. What if you'd given yourself just 10 more seconds before speaking or hitting send? Not to suppress the feeling, but to interrogate it. Is this reaction aligned with who I aspire to be? Will this action move the ball forward or just vent steam? That's the Stoic gap in action. The modern world mistakes speed for competence, but here's the truth. Urgency is often the enemy of impact. The next time you're tempted to react, try this. Literally step back, one physical step. That tiny distance creates mental space to ask, is this the hill I'm willing to die on? Because mastery isn't about never feeling provoked. It's about recognizing that between the spark and the explosion, you hold the match, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not light it. Even Marcus Aurelius joked with his tutors, that small, often overlooked fact shatters the myth that Stoicism is about stone-faced solemnity, the truth. Some of history's most formidable leaders wielded humor like a scalpel, precise, disarming, and deeply human. Seneca captured this balance perfectly. We should be serious without being rigid and cheerful without being frivolous. Notice the nuance. Levity isn't a distraction from leadership, it's a delivery system for it. When used strategically, humor doesn't undermine authority. It amplifies it by bridging the gap between power and relatability. Take Barack Obama's debate performances. Faced with opponents trying to paint him as aloof or inexperienced, he'd deploy self-deprecating wit like a secret weapon. Remember his quip about Hillary Clinton being likable enough, or his deadpan response to Romney's critique of naval ship numbers. We also have fewer horses and bayonets. Those moments weren't just laughs, they were tactical resets. By diffusing tension with humor, Obama did something brilliant. He demonstrated emotional agility, the Stoic art of meeting pressure with poise rather than rigidity. Here's why this matters for modern leaders. In high-stakes environments, boardrooms, negotiations, crisis management, the person who can lightly puncture the tension often controls the room's emotional thermostat. Humor signals confidence, not just in yourself, but in the situation. It tells your team, we've got this, without needing to say it. Think of a surgeon cracking a dry joke during a complex procedure. The laughter isn't frivolous, it's a pressure valve, letting the team exhale and refocus. But there's a crucial distinction between Stoic levity and cheap sarcasm. One builds connection, the other erodes trust. The Stoic leader's humor never punches down, veers into cynicism, or sacrifices clarity. It's a tool for revealing truth, not avoiding it. When Netflix's Reed Hastings joked about their infamous Q Wixter rebrand failure, there's a reason we didn't test Q Wixter with dogs they couldn't type. He didn't trivialize the mistake. He acknowledged it with grace, showing his team that even stumbles could be learned from and laughed about. Now turn the mirror inward. Where's your demeanor accidentally pushing people away? Maybe it's the relentless intensity in meetings that stifles creativity, or the tendency to mistake Stoic for stern. What if, just once this week, you deliberately used humor to break the ice? Not forced stand-up, but an observation, a playful exaggeration, even a well-timed eye roll at the absurdity of corporate jargon. That tiny shift does more than lighten the mood. It signals that leadership isn't about perfection. It's about showing up fully human, fully present, because here's the paradox the Stoics understood. True strength isn't heavy. It's light enough to bend without breaking, to laugh without losing focus. And in a world that often mistakes gravity for wisdom, the leader who masters that balance doesn't just command respect, they inspire loyalty. Will this matter in 100 years? That simple question cuts through the noise of ego like a scalpel through tissue. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Time is like a river made up of events which pass, and its current is strong." The visionary leader doesn't fight that current, they plant seeds along its banks, knowing the trees will outlive them. This is the essence of Stoic legacy, not carving your name in stone, but tending soil you'll never stand on. Consider Patagonia's radical decision to make Earth its sole shareholder. While competitors chased quarterly profits, founder Yvon Chouinard surrendered ownership to fight climate change, declaring, "Instead of extracting value from nature, we're using wealth to protect our home planet." That's not charity, it's strategic selflessness. By prioritizing impact over inheritance, Patagonia didn't diminish its influence, it multiplied it. The Stoics would have recognized this instantly. Real power isn't measured by what you accumulate, but by what you activate in others. Here's the paradox most miss. Legacy building isn't about scaling your personal brand. It's about creating systems that thrive without you. Think of the Roman aqueducts. Their engineers didn't plaque their names on every arch. They focused on designing structures so resilient they'd outlast empires. Modern leaders can learn from this. A CEO fixated on press coverage might build a flashy product, but one obsessed with institutional knowledge. They'll build a culture that innovates for generations. So let's make this uncomfortably personal. What's your non-monument? Not the trophy or title, but the quiet contribution that compounds over lifetimes. Maybe it's mentoring someone who'll redefine your industry, or championing a policy that outlives your tenure. The test isn't whether people remember you, it's whether your work becomes so woven into the fabric of progress that its origins fade into irrelevance. This is where Stoicism redefines success. The anxious leader asks, "How will I be remembered?" The Stoic asks, "What won't need remembering because it simply endures?" That shift from building a name to planting forests is how ordinary leaders become eternal, not through statues but through seeds, and the best time to plant them. Not someday, now, while the river still flows. You can't think clearly when your body is screaming. That's the brutal truth every Stoic leader confronts, because philosophy isn't just debated in lecture halls, it's forged in the furnace of physical discipline. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus, put it bluntly, "Neglect of the body is just as shameful as neglect of the soul." Notice he didn't say, "Worship the body," he called for stewardship. The visionary leader knows this. Your mind isn't separate from your muscles, it's powered by them. Take Jack Dorsey's ice bath ritual. The Twitter founder didn't embrace freezing plunges as a biohacking trend. He used them as a mental hack. The shock of cold water isn't just physical stress, it's a live drill for emotional control. When your nervous system screams to escape and you consciously choose to stay, you're not just building cold tolerance. You're reinforcing the Stoic superpower, voluntary discomfort as training for involuntary challenges. Because the boardroom panic attack feels a lot less daunting when you've already mastered your body's primal reflexes. This is where most modern professionals get it backward. They treat fitness as vanity or obligation, something to squeeze in between meetings, but the Stoic sees it as infrastructure. Think of a Formula One car. Its engine might be cutting edge, but without a chassis strong enough to handle the torque, it's useless. Your brilliant ideas are no different. Sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, or sedentary stagnation don't just dull your body, they short-circuit your judgment. History's greatest minds knew this. Churchill wrote his finest speeches after afternoon naps. Hemingway stood at his typewriter for hours to stay alert. They weren't indulging quirks, they were optimizing their hardware for peak performance. So let's make this actionable. What single physical habit could sharpen your mind this week? Maybe it's swapping your midday coffee for a 10-minute walk. Sunlight and movement beat caffeine for cognitive clarity. Or turning your phone off 90 minutes before bed, letting melatonin do its silent repair work. The goal isn't to become a Spartan athlete overnight. It's to recognize that every squat, every salad, every early night isn't just self-care, it's strategic leadership. Because here's the Stoic twist most miss: physical discipline isn't about punishment. It's about freedom, the freedom to outlast crises without burnout, the freedom to think clearly when others are fogged by fatigue, and most of all, the freedom to prove to yourself first that you're the kind of leader who doesn't just command others, but masters their own biology. That's not fitness, that's leverage, and in a world where so many are led by their exhaustion, that leverage becomes your silent advantage. The richer you become, the more stoic you need to be. That counterintuitive truth is the linchpin of financial mastery, not because money corrupts, but because it amplifies who you already are. Seneca saw this clearly when he warned, "Wealth is the slave of the wise, the master of the fool." Notice he didn't condemn riches, he exposed the relationship. Money isn't inherently virtuous or villainous, it's a magnifying glass. It stretches your virtues into greater impact and your vices into glaring liabilities. The visionary leader understands this. True wealth isn't measured in digits, but in detachment. Warren Buffett's lifestyle embodies this principle. Even as one of the wealthiest humans alive, he still lives in the same Omaha house he bought in 1958 for $31,000. His breakfast rarely costs more than $3. This isn't frugality for its own sake, it's strategic indifference. By refusing to let luxury inflate his needs, Buffett maintains something far more valuable than opulence: optionality. While peers are trapped maintaining lavish lifestyles, he's free to make billion-dollar decisions unshackled by the fear of losing comforts. That's the Stoic twist. Wealth isn't about what you own, but what you don't need to own. Here's where modern culture gets it backwards. We confuse net worth with self-worth, clinging to symbols: the luxury car, the designer wardrobe, the Instagrammable vacation, as proof we've arrived. But the Stoic leader recognizes these as leaks in their focus. Every dollar spent on status is a dollar not invested in freedom, growth, or impact. Consider the tech founder who wears the same black turtleneck daily. It's not a fashion statement, it's a cognitive tax cut. By eliminating trivial choices, they preserve mental bandwidth for decisions that actually move the needle. So let's make this visceral. What's one luxury in your life that's actually a chain? Maybe it's the premium cable package you barely watch, the leased car draining your monthly cash flow, or the expensive hobby that's become more obligation than joy. Now imagine cutting it, not as deprivation but as declaration. A statement that your security isn't tied to possessions, but to the untouchable assets no market can crash: your skills, your judgment, your discipline. This is where Stoicism transforms personal finance. The anxious investor chases hot stocks to outrun insecurity. The Stoic builds enough, then lets compounding do the heavy lifting while they focus on living. Not because money doesn't matter, but because it matters precisely enough, as fuel for purpose, not a substitute for it. When you stop conflating wealth with worth, you unlock the ultimate irony. The less you need money to validate you, the more effortlessly it flows to you. Not as a master, but as a willing servant. Your phone is a slot machine. Here's how to break even. Every notification, every infinite scroll, Every auto-playing video is designed to hijack your focus like a Vegas algorithm rigged against you. Epictetus saw this coming 2,000 years ago when he warned, "The chief task in life is simply this, to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control and which have to do with the choices I actually control." Today, that separation isn't just philosophical, it's survival, because the attention economy isn't competing for your time, it's waging war for your mind. Take Cal Newport's digital declutter experiment. For 30 days, he stripped his digital life to the bone. No social media, no reactive email checks, no apps that didn't serve a concrete purpose. The result, not deprivation, but liberation. His focus sharpened, his creativity surged, and something unexpected happened. He stopped craving the dopamine hits he'd thought were essential. That's the Stoic twist. Minimalism isn't about denying yourself pleasure. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over what deserves to pleasure you. Here's what most people miss. Digital clutter isn't neutral, it's cognitive debt. Every unchecked notification is a mental IOU. Every quick scroll is a loan against your future attention. The visionary leader knows this. They don't just manage distractions, they engineer their environment to make distraction physically harder than focus. Think of Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace in a study with no internet, no smartphone, just ink, paper, and the brutal honesty of his own thoughts. Modern tools can't replicate that isolation, but they can emulate its intention. Turning off read receipts isn't rudeness, it's respect for your own cognitive bandwidth. Scheduling email batches isn't eccentric, it's strategic defense. So let's make this visceral. Pull out your phone and open your screen time report. What app silently devours your focus like a parasite? Maybe it's the newsfeed that leaves you agitated but uninformed, or the messaging platform that blurs work and life until neither gets your best. Now imagine deleting just one, not forever, just for 72 hours. Feel that resistance. That's not logic talking. It's addiction masquerading as utility. This is where Stoicism meets modern warfare. The ancients battled external chaos. We battle engineered addiction, but the weapon remains the same: discernment. When you start treating every digital interaction as a trade, your attention for their revenue, something shifts. You stop asking, "Can I check this?" and start demanding, "Should I?" And in that tiny gap lies the difference between being a user and being used. The best leaders work themselves out of a job. That's the paradox of Stoic succession. True power isn't measured by how indispensable you become, but by how effortlessly your team thrives without you. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled Rome at its peak, wrote in his private meditations, "What we do now echoes in eternity." He wasn't talking about monuments or military conquests. He was describing the quiet art of mentorship, the deliberate act of planting trees under whose shade you'll never sit. Because immortality isn't found in titles or trophies. It's forged in the minds and hands of those you teach to think, decide, and lead beyond your own limits. Consider Disney's rotational leadership model. When Bob Iger stepped down as CEO, he didn't just handpick a successor, he groomed multiple candidates, rotating them through key roles to test their mettle. The result, a seamless transition that most corporations never achieve. That's Stoic leadership in action, not hoarding authority, but distributing it. The visionary leader understands that their legacy isn't a single torch passed at retirement, it's 1,000 sparks lit daily, each one capable of igniting its own fire. Here's the mindset shift that changes everything. Leadership isn't a solo sprint, it's a relay race. Your job isn't just to run your leg well. It's to ensure the next runner gets the baton with enough momentum to surpass you. Think of a coach who trains athletes to break their own records. Their greatness isn't diminished when their proteges win gold, it's multiplied. The Stoic leader embraces this with radical humility. They don't fear being outshone, they engineer it. So let's make this uncomfortably personal. Who in your orbit is being primed to outpace you? Not just the competent deputy who follows orders, but the restless talent who challenges your assumptions. The one who asks why not when you default to, that's how we've always done it. Mentorship isn't about cloning your methods, it's about cultivating thinkers who'll rewrite the playbook. This is where Stoic succession collides with modern leadership. Most organizations promote based on tenure or technical skill, mistaking experience for vision. But the leaders who build dynasties, whether in business, sports, or science, do something radically different. They ask not who can maintain my legacy, but who will evolve it. That's how you turn a team into a lineage, not by being irreplaceable, but by making yourself obsolete, one well-prepared successor at a time. Every mile traveled is a mile of prejudice undone. That's the Stoic secret hidden in plain sight. Movement isn't just about changing locations, it's about rewiring perspective. Seneca, who wrote letters from exile that still shape leaders today, captured it perfectly. Travel and change of place impart new vigor to the mind. He wasn't praising postcard sunsets or passport stamps. He was revealing a radical truth. Physical distance creates mental clarity. When you step outside the familiar, you don't just see new landscapes, you unsee the invisible cages of habit and assumption that have been shaping your decisions all along. Consider Churchill pacing the beaches of Normandy during his infamous Black Dog depressions. Those solitary walks weren't escapes from wartime pressure, they were strategic recalibrations. With each step on foreign soil, he gained something no war room could provide: the outsider's vantage point, the crashing waves, the empty horizon, the sheer scale of geography. They stripped away the tunnel vision of crisis, reminding him that even empires are temporary, and that fresh solutions often hide in the cracks between cultures. That's the alchemy of Stoic travel. It doesn't just show you the world, it shows you yourself through the world's eyes. Here's what most travelers miss. The value isn't in the distance covered, but in the displacement experienced. A tourist collects photos, a Stoic collects friction, those jarring moments when local customs expose their unexamined biases. Eating alone in a Tokyo izakaya reveals how much you rely on conversation to feel valid. Navigating a Moroccan souk without haggling skills exposes your privilege. Even something as simple as realizing your universal hand gesture is offensive elsewhere, these aren't inconveniences. They're masterclasses in humility, the kind no book can teach. So let's make this visceral. Pick a place that unsettles you, not because it's dangerous, but because it contradicts your norms. Maybe it's a country where silence is valued over small talk, or a city where time feels elastic compared to your clock-driven routine. Now imagine spending 3 days there with one rule: no complaining, only observing. How would your leadership shift if you absorbed their definition of productivity or their approach to conflict? That's the gift of travel when treated as philosophy in motion. It doesn't just add knowledge, it erodes dogma. This is where Stoicism flips modern wanderlust on its head. The Instagram era treats travel as a backdrop for selfies. The Stoic treats it as a mirror for the soul, because the ultimate journey isn't across borders, it's into the uncharted territory of your own limitations. And the best part, you don't need a first-class ticket to start. Sometimes the most perspective-shattering voyage begins with a single step into the unfamiliar neighborhood you've been avoiding. The frontier isn't out there, it's in your willingness to let the world recalibrate your compass. You are what you read. Choose your mental meals wisely. Epictetus warned his students, don't just say you've read books, show that they've read you. That's the Stoic twist on intellectual consumption. Wisdom isn't about how many pages you turn, but how deeply those pages turn you. Think of your mind as a forge. Every book, article, or podcast is either raw ore or worthless slag. The visionary leader knows this distinction cold. They don't just read, they metabolize. Consider Bill Gates' famous Think Weeks. Twice a year, he vanishes into a cabin with a stack of books and a notebook, emerging with insights that reshape Microsoft's trajectory. But here's what most miss. Gates doesn't just highlight passages, he argues with them. His margins bristle with counterpoints, questions, and connections. That's the Stoic reader's secret. Engagement trumps consumption. Every great book is a sparring partner, not a sermon. This is where modern professionals self-sabotage. They confuse information with wisdom, mistaking a cluttered RSS feed for intellectual wealth. The Stoic alternative, selective starvation. Naval Ravikant, the philosopher-investor, puts it bluntly, most books are just footnotes to a few great ones. The leader's library isn't measured in volume, but in rereads. Marcus Aurelius carried Meditations not as a trophy, but as a whetstone returning daily to sharpen his mind against its truths. So let's make this visceral. Scan your bookshelf or podcast queue. How much is mental junk food, clickbait disguised as content, hot takes masquerading as insight? Now identify one work that rewards slow digestion. Maybe it's Seneca's Letters, patiently unpacking resilience, or Ray Dalio's Principles, revealing decision-making as an algorithm. The test isn't whether it's entertaining, but whether it rearranges your thinking. Here's the neuroscience behind why this works. When you reread deeply, you're not just recalling ideas, you're forging myelin, the neural insulation that makes mastery effortless. Each revisit layers understanding like tree rings, turning knowledge from something you recall to something you are. That's how wisdom compounds, not through breadth, but through recursive depth. Now the pivot. What single passage have you underlined twice? Not because it sounded clever, but because it haunted you, refusing to release its grip until you lived its truth. Find it, return to it, let it interrogate your latest decisions, because in the end, your intellectual diet isn't about feeding your curiosity. It's about starving your ignorance, one deliberate page at a time. Failure is data, not destiny. That shift from seeing setbacks as indictments to treating them as intelligence is where Stoic leaders separate themselves from the pack. Marcus Aurelius put it bluntly, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. He wasn't offering empty consolation. He was revealing a ruthless truth. Every mistake is raw material for mastery, but only if you dissect it without drowning in drama. Take SpaceX's approach to rocket explosions. They don't call them failures, they label them rapid, unscheduled disassemblies. That tongue-in-cheek phrasing isn't just PR spin, it's psychological judo. By stripping away emotional baggage, engineers can pore over debris like forensic scientists, extracting insights that turn explosions into evolutionary steps. The same fiery crash that would paralyze another organization becomes SpaceX's competitive edge. That's the Stoic failure autopsy in action, cold, clinical, and relentlessly constructive. Here's how to apply this mindset without becoming robotic. First, separate the event from the narrative. A missed sales target isn't proof you're inadequate, it's a dataset revealing where your pitch misfired. Second, adopt the 5 whys technique pioneered by Toyota's engineers. When a problem occurs, ask why 5 times. Your first answer will be superficial, the 5th will expose the root cause. For example, why did the client say no? Because the proposal didn't address their pain points. Why not? Because we didn't ask the right discovery questions. Drill deep enough and you'll find the real lesson hiding beneath the surface. Now, the pivotal question: what recent failure have you been avoiding dissecting? Maybe it's the project that missed its deadline or the conversation that spiraled into conflict. Grab a notebook and analyze it like a lab specimen. What variables could you control? Where did assumptions blindside you? Crucially, what's the one behavioral or strategic tweak this autopsy reveals? Not 10 action items. One. Because mastery isn't about overhauling everything. It's about precision adjustments that compound. This is where Stoicism transforms failure from foe to mentor. The anxious mind obsesses over, what does this say about me? The Stoic asks, what does this teach me? That subtle reframe unlocks something extraordinary, the ability to walk away from setbacks not with lighter shoulders, but with sharper tools. And in a world where most people keep tripping over the same rock twice, that edge is priceless. Charisma isn't manufactured, it's uncovered. That's the Stoic secret. Most mistrue influence doesn't come from rehearsed charm or forced enthusiasm, but from the quiet certainty of someone who stopped performing and started being. Epictetus nailed it centuries ago. Know first who you are and then adorn yourself accordingly. Notice the order. Authentic presence isn't about adding layers of charisma. It's about stripping away everything that isn't you. The leader who stands firm in their values doesn't need to raise their voice to be heard. Their consistency becomes their microphone. Consider Jacinda Ardern's response to the Christchurch mosque shootings. While others might have reached for grand gestures or scripted empathy, New Zealand's Prime Minister did something radical. She led from raw, unfiltered conviction. Her voice cracked during speeches. She wore a hijab to honor victims without a PR team's approval. There was no optics strategy, just a human being so aligned with her principles that every word carried weight. That's Stoic charisma in action, not the absence of emotion, but the absence of pretense. People don't follow perfection, they follow real. Here's the paradox modern leaders overlook. Charisma isn't something you project, it's something you stop blocking. Think of a lighthouse. Its power isn't in theatrics, it's in steadfastness. Ships don't navigate by chasing flashing lights, they trust the beam that never wavers. The same applies to leadership. When your actions align seamlessly with your ethos, people stop questioning your credibility and start mirroring your resolve. Now, the uncomfortable mirror. Where are you performing instead of being? Maybe it's the polished LinkedIn persona that feels miles from your private doubts, or the boardroom bravado that drains you by noon. Authenticity isn't about oversharing or abandoning professionalism, it's about releasing the exhausting act of editing yourself into someone you think others will approve of. This is where Stoicism flips charisma training on its head. Most programs teach you to simulate confidence through body language hacks or speech patterns. The Stoic approach: cultivate confidence by living so congruently that your presence becomes undeniable. Not because you've learned to command a room, but because you've stopped apologizing for occupying space in it. The next time you're tempted to turn on your leadership persona, try this instead. Pause, breathe, and ask, what would I say or do right now if I weren't afraid of being judged? That's not just authenticity, it's magnetism distilled to its purest form. Because in a world drowning in performance, the rarest commodity isn't polish. It's unfiltered conviction. Stoicism isn't just a philosophy, it's the operating system behind every leader who's ever shaped history. Think about it. The same principles that guided Marcus Aurelius through empire-level crises are the ones modern visionaries use to navigate market crashes, political upheavals, and personal setbacks. The thread is unbreakable. Commanding the future doesn't start with forecasting trends or assembling resources. It begins with mastering the present moment, the only moment you ever truly control. Aurelius left us a clue in his Meditations. The present is all that they can give up, since that is all you have, and what you do not have, you cannot lose. That's the Stoic's edge, recognizing that time isn't a river you stand beside, but one you're already in. Every decision, every reaction, every breath is a stroke in the current that carries you toward the legacy you'll leave. So where does this leave you? Not at the end of a lesson, but at the beginning of a practice. Don't try to overhaul your life overnight. That's the mistake most make. They treat transformation like a sprint when it's a marathon of microscopic adjustments. Instead, pick one Stoic discipline to weaponize this week. Maybe it's the morning ritual that anchors your focus before the world intrudes, or the evening reflection that turns mistakes into mentors. Perhaps it's the deliberate pause before reacting, that sacred space where wisdom overrides impulse. Whatever you choose, commit to it like your future depends on it, because it does. This isn't goodbye, it's forward. If today's insights resonated with you, imagine what happens when we dive deeper. Subscribe and join a community of leaders who aren't just chasing success, but redefining it through Stoic principles. Because the journey doesn't end here, it sharpens. Every video, every discussion, every challenge is another stone laid in the path toward unshakable leadership. The future belongs to those who command it. The question is, will you be among them? The choice, as always, is yours. Press play on what's next.